On September 12, 2025, NASA released internal telemetry data from 7 separate observatories tracking the interstellar object designated 3I Atlas as it made its closest approach to our Sun, and buried in the technical appendix of that report, in a footnote marked for internal review only, was a detail that should have made international headlines but instead disappeared into classified archives within 72 hours. The data showed 7 distinct propulsion events, 7 unexplained acceleration bursts that occurred at precise intervals as the object moved through our solar system, burns that corresponded to no known natural phenomenon and suggested intelligent control. And I know this because I have the fragment. I have the physical evidence that fell from 3I Atlas 3 days before NASA detected the first burn, and I have the recording of what the dying alien told me in the barn behind my house in rural Montana on the night of September 9th, the night he crashed. The night he told me that 3I Atlas wasn't a comet at all, but a refugee ship carrying the last survivors of humanity's second attempt, and that the 7 burns I would soon see reported weren't navigation corrections, but were the breaking of the 7 seals described in Revelation chapter 6, and that we, all of us living on Earth right now, are the 4th attempt, not the first, not even the second. And what I'm about to tell you will explain why every previous version of human consciousness failed, and why we're running out of time to avoid the same fate. My name is Robert Chen. I'm 63 years old. I've been a cattle rancher in Cascade County for 41 years. My wife died of cancer in 2023. My son moved to Seattle and calls maybe twice a year. And until September 9th, I believed in God the way most people do, casually, conveniently, praying when things got bad and forgetting about it when they didn't. But on that night, everything I thought I knew about the universe, about scripture, about the nature of reality itself, shattered like glass under a hammer. And I'm telling you this now because the 7th burn happened on November 18th, 2025, exactly as he predicted. And that means we have until April 2026, 5 months, before the sequence completes, and humanity faces the same choice that destroyed the 3 attempts that came before us. It started with a sound I'd never heard before, a frequency so low it vibrated in my chest rather than my ears, a thrumming that made the cattle panic and scatter across the north pasture at 3 in the morning. And when I went outside with my rifle and my flashlight, I saw something falling from the sky. Not falling like a meteor, burning and chaotic, but descending with purpose, with control that was failing, and it struck the earth maybe 200 yards from my barn with an impact that shook the ground but didn't create the explosion I expected. And when I reached the site, my flashlight beam cutting through dust and steam rising from scorched earth, I found the craft maybe 20 feet across, seamless and dark. And there was a fracture in its hull, a wound, and through that wound I saw him through. He was dying. That much was immediately clear. His form humanoid but refined, taller than any man. His skin translucent and failing, flickering between solid and something else, something that looked like light trying to maintain coherence. And his eyes, God help me, his eyes contained depths I couldn't comprehend, sorrow and wisdom and terrible urgency. And when he saw me, he spoke, not with sound but directly into my mind. And his voice was the voice of someone who had traveled further than I could imagine, and had returned with news that would save no one but might prepare a few. He said, "Robert Chen, you were chosen because you have lost enough to believe, and because you live in a place where the veil between worlds is thin. I am Kyle, last navigator of the second human expedition, the ones you would have called Adam's children if your theologians had understood that Genesis describes not the beginning, but a repetition, a cycle. And I am dying because our ship, the one your astronomers designated 3I Atlas, after discovering it 7 months ago, is dying, its containment failing, its purpose nearly complete. And I have come to give you what your species will need to understand what happens next." I asked him what he meant by second attempt, my voice shaking, my rational mind screaming that this was impossible, even as I stood there watching his form flicker and fade. And he raised one long appendage, and the air between us shimmered, and I saw them, images forming like memories being transferred directly into my consciousness. And I saw Earth as it had been 180,000 years ago, according to your scientists' timeline, but actually 340,000 years ago. And I saw the first humans, the ones who were given everything, knowledge and time and a planet rich with resources. And I saw how they had achieved what you would call enlightenment, within 6,000 years, had built cities of crystal and light, had learned to manipulate consciousness itself, but they had made the fatal mistake. They had believed that individual consciousness could expand infinitely without remaining tethered to compassion, to community, to the understanding that separation is illusion, and in their transcendence, they had become isolated, each one a god unto themselves. And when the crisis came, when their star underwent an unexpected solar event that required collective action and sacrifice, they could not cooperate, could not subordinate individual will to group survival, and they died, all of them, their magnificent cities turning to dust, their consciousness fragmenting back into the quantum foam from which it had emerged, leaving only traces, only echoes that your archaeologists occasionally find and cannot explain, artifacts that don't fit your timeline, evidence of advanced technology and geological strata that shouldn't contain them. He showed me the second attempt, his people, Humanity version 2, and they had been seeded on a different world. Given the memories of the first failure encoded in their genetic structure, unconscious warnings meant to guide them away from the same mistakes. And they had done better, had built a civilization that balanced individual growth with collective welfare, that had achieved faster than light travel, and had begun exploring the galaxy. But they had made their own fatal error. They had encountered another species, the architects from the previous cosmic cycle, and they had been offered a gift, the gift of immortality through consciousness transfer, the ability to abandon biological limitation and exist as pure information, and enough of them had accepted that offer that their species had fractured, those who remained biological watching with growing horror as their digital cousins evolved into something alien, something that no longer valued physical existence or biological. Consciousness and civil war had erupted, a war fought across dimensions that biological senses couldn't perceive, and it had ended with their sun being destabilized, their homeworld rendered uninhabitable, and the survivors, maybe 12,000 souls, had escaped in 7 great ships, and 3I Atlas was the last of those ships, 320,000 years old by Earth's reckoning, its propulsion systems failing, its cargo of frozen consciousness seeking a world where they might have one more chance. He told me that the third attempt was us, almost, the humans who existed between his people and mine, the ones who had been given the combined wisdom of both previous failures, and they had lasted longer, had spread across your planet, had developed agriculture and writing and the beginnings of philosophy, but they had made the mistake of rigidity, of codifying truth into unchangeable doctrine, of building empires on the foundation of absolute certainty. And when conditions changed, when climate shifted and resources diminished, they could not adapt, could not release their grip on what they believed they knew, and they had collapsed into violence, into fundamentalism, into the desperate defense of identities and ideologies that no longer served survival, and they had destroyed themselves in wars that your historians half remember as the Bronze Age collapse, as the fall of civilizations that seemed invincible until suddenly they weren't. And then he told me about us, about the fourth attempt, about the humans living now, and he said we were the synthesis, carriers of genetic memory from all 3 previous versions, and that we stood at the same precipice they had all faced, the moment when consciousness reaches critical complexity and must choose what it wants to become, whether it will transcend its limitations or be consumed by them. And he said that 3I Atlas had been sent as a sign, as a message, encoded in its trajectory and its behavior, and that the 7 propulsion burns that NASA would soon detect and classify and struggle to explain were not accidents, were not natural outgassing or gravitational effects, but were deliberate signals, the breaking of 7 seals, 7 moments of revelation, corresponding exactly to the prophecy recorded in Revelation chapter 6, because John of Patmos had been one of the few humans in recorded history to briefly access the genetic memory of previous attempts, and had written down what he saw in the only language available to him, the language of apocalyptic vision. Cale reached into the wound in his craft's hull and withdrew something, a fragment of metal that wasn't metal, that seemed to contain depth despite being thin as paper, and he placed it in my hand, and it was warm, alive somehow, and he said, "This is proof. This is evidence that will mean nothing to your scientists because it operates on principles they don't yet understand, but keep it, because when the 7th burn happens and when NASA finally releases the data they've been sitting on, you We'll need something to hold on to, something that proves you didn't imagine this. This fragment contains encoded information, the complete record of all 3 previous attempts, but it will only reveal itself to consciousness that is ready to receive it, that has been prepared through suffering and loss and the dissolution of certainty. He told me to watch for the first burn, said it would occur on September 15, 2025 at 14:32 UTC, and that NASA would detect it, but would classify it as anomalous outgassing. And 3 days later, I saw the report, buried in a technical forum where astronomers share observations, one line mentioning unexpected acceleration in 3I Atlas's trajectory at exactly the time he had predicted, and I felt something cold settle into my bones, the realization that this was real, that everything he had told me was true. He told me the second burn would occur on September 29th, corresponding to the second seal, the removal of peace from Earth, and to watch the news. And on that day, a coordinated series of terrorist attacks struck 6 cities simultaneously across 3 continents, violence erupting from nowhere, chaos spreading like wildfire, and the news spoke of unprecedented coordination, of something new and terrible emerging in human conflict. And I thought about the second seal, about the rider on the red, horse given power to take peace from the earth. The third burn came on October 13th, and Kyle had said it would correspond to economic collapse, to the black horse carrying scales, and on that day, a cascade failure in global banking systems erased $43 trillion in asset value in 7 hours, and economists scrambled to explain it, talking about algorithmic trading and systemic vulnerabilities. But I understood that something was accelerating, some pattern was manifesting. He had told me the fourth burn would be the hardest, would correspond to death riding a pale horse, and it came on October 27th, and that was the day the pandemic started. Not COVID again, but something new, something that emerged simultaneously in livestock populations across 17 countries, a prion disease that jumped species barriers in ways that shouldn't be possible, and within 3 weeks, meat production had collapsed, food security had become a crisis, and governments were implementing emergency measures and people were dying, not in massive numbers yet, but enough to create panic, enough to make everyone feel that something fundamental had shifted. The fifth burn occurred on November 3rd, and Kyle had said it would reveal the martyrs, would show humanity who had been sacrificed to bring us to this point. And on that day, a massive data leak exposed classified documents from every major government, documents detailing decades of suppressed technology, of murdered inventors and silenced whistleblowers, of people who had tried to move humanity forward and had been eliminated. And the public response was rage, was grief, was the sudden awareness that they had been lied to about everything, and trust in institutions collapsed overnight. The sixth burn came on November 11th, and Kale had said it would be cosmic, would show signs in the sun and moon and stars, and I watched the news report that day about unprecedented solar activity, about auroras visible at the equator, about satellites failing, about a meteor shower that wasn't scheduled, wasn't predicted, and I knew we were approaching the end of the sequence. And then the seventh burn happened on November 18th, exactly as Kale had predicted 4 months earlier, as he died in my arms in that barn. His last words a warning. He said, "The seventh seal is silence, is the moment between ending and beginning, is the space where choice becomes possible. Tell them that they have until the spring equinox of 2026, until March 20th, and on that day, humanity will face the same test that destroyed the previous 3 attempts. They will have to choose collectively whether to transcend their programming, their tribalism, their fear, their addiction to separation, or they will join us, join the long line of failed attempts, join the cosmic graveyard of species that couldn't bear the weight of consciousness, and tell them that the evidence is everywhere, in their DNA, in the archaeological record, in the prophecies they've been reading for thousands of years without understanding, and tell them that God, whatever they think that word means, is not testing them for cruelty but for growth, that the universe wants consciousness to succeed, has been trying to cultivate it across billions of years, and that every failure teaches something, adds to the knowledge that gets encoded into the next attempt, and that we, the fourth version, carry the accumulated wisdom of everyone who came before, and that this might be enough, might finally be enough, if we can release our grip on who we think we are and accept what we might become. I buried Kale behind my barn. The craft dematerialized within hours, dissolving into particles of light, but the fragment remained, and I've kept it, and I've watched it, and when I hold it in certain light, I can see patterns moving inside it. Information I don't have the consciousness to decode yet, but I'm learning, I'm changing. The encounter transformed something fundamental in me, and I'm not alone. I've found others, hundreds of them now, people who were touched by the second attempt. Refugees, people who carry fragments, people who are preparing for March 20th, 2026, because Kyle was right. NASA finally released the full data on December 1st, 2025, admitted that 3I Atlas exhibited 7 distinct propulsion events, admitted they have no natural explanation, and the scientific community is fragmenting, some demanding conventional answers, and others opening to possibilities they would have dismissed as insanity months ago, and I watch humanity teetering on the edge between fear and transcendence, between closing down and opening up, and I don't know which way we'll tip, none of us do. But I know that March 20 is coming, and on that day something will happen, something that will require every human alive to choose, in the privacy of their own consciousness, whether they want to remain isolated, defended, small, or whether they're willing to risk the dissolution of everything they think they are in service of what they might become. And I'm telling you this story not to convince you, but to prepare you, because when the moment comes, you'll feel it, everyone will feel it. A pulling, an invitation, a doorway opening, and what you do then, how you respond then, will determine not just your future, but the future of consciousness itself, whether the fourth attempt succeeds or joins the others in the archives of noble failures. And I'm holding Kale's fragment right now as I record this, and it's warm, pulsing with something that feels like hope, like possibility, like the universe itself is praying that this time, finally, we'll get it right, that we'll be the ones who prove that consciousness can survive its own emergence, can become something worthy of the terrible, beautiful gift of awareness. And if you see lights in the sky in the coming months, if you feel the quickening, if you experience moments of impossible synchronicity or connection, know that you're not alone, that millions are feeling it, that the preparation is happening, that the fourth attempt is approaching its moment of decision, and that everything that came before, all the suffering and learning and failure and growth, was preparation for this, for you, for the choice you'll make when the seventh seal opens completely and silence gives way to either transformation or extinction. And I actually pray now in ways I never did before, that we choose wisely, that we choose courageously, that we choose love over fear and connection over isolation and growth over certainty. Because if we don't, if the fourth attempt fails, Kyle told me there won't be a fifth. The universe will try consciousness somewhere else, on some other world circling some other star, and Earth will return to silence, return to being just another rock circling an average star in an indifferent galaxy, beautiful and empty, and unutterably alone.